Have you ever wondered why no matter how hard you work, your bank account never seems to grow? What if the answer isn't about working harder, but changing your habits? Asterisk. We all dream of financial freedom. We all imagine a life where money isn't a constant worry. But most of us unknowingly trap ourselves in habits that silently keep us poor. Today, we'll uncover these habits and how changing them can transform not just your wealth, but your mindset and English skills along the way. Meet Alex, a hardworking young professional, always on time, always diligent, yet barely making ends meet. Every month, bills pile up, opportunities slip away, and frustration grows. One evening, after missing yet another savings goal, Alex stumbles upon an old mentor's advice. It's not about how much you earn. It's about how you think, how you spend, and the habits you embrace every single day. That night, Alex starts noticing patterns, paying more attention to small expenses, investing time in learning, and avoiding destructive habits like mindless scrolling, unnecessary shopping, and negative self-talk. Slowly, Alex begins to see a shift. Small savings grow, opportunities appear, confidence rises, and English improves through daily learning routines. The journey isn't instant, and it isn't easy, but each step forward becomes a triumph, proving that breaking free from limiting habits is not just about money. It's about reclaiming your life, your focus, and your future. Alex sat at the edge of his worn-out couch, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the apartment. Outside, the city hummed with life, horns honked, footsteps echoed, laughter spilled from cafes, but it all felt distant, almost mocking. The bank app on his phone blinked back at him, numbers frozen in time, reflecting months of relentless effort that seemed to vanish before he could grasp it. Despite waking early, working late, and giving his everything, he remained trapped in the same frustrating cycle. Rent, bills, groceries, everything demanded attention. And yet his savings never grew. The truth settled heavily in his chest. The problem wasn't his ambition. It was the invisible habits that silently stole from him every day. It wasn't laziness. Alex was disciplined, driven, relentless. He poured himself into work, answered emails at midnight, skipped lunch breaks, and stayed at the office long after others had left. But small, unnoticed habits had crept into his life, tiny indulgences, momentary distractions, and small compromises that, together, had been siphoning his potential. A morning latte here, an impulsive snack there, endless hours scrolling through social media, gadgets bought on whim, all seemed insignificant at the moment. But the cumulative effect was devastating. He had been giving away his time, his energy, and his resources without realizing it. As he stared at the dusty bookshelf in the corner, he saw the unopened self-help books and English learning courses he had purchased months ago. Knowledge and opportunity sat idle, gathering dust, while his life moved past him in quiet increments. The habits he had allowed to dominate were more than just financial drains. They were obstacles blocking his growth, both personally and professionally. He imagined a life where money, time, and energy worked for him instead of against him, where small, consistent choices built momentum rather than eroded it. That life felt distant, almost dreamlike, yet achingly possible. Alex felt a mix of frustration and clarity. Awareness was the first step. Recognizing the silent thief, the subtle patterns, the unexamined decisions was the spark that could ignite change. Every habit, once brought into the light, became manageable, no longer invisible. Each small choice, each conscious effort, could redirect the current of his life. That night, he resolved to begin, not tomorrow, not next week, but immediately, to examine every habit, challenge every impulse, and reclaim control over the life and future he had unconsciously been giving away. For the first time in years, a fragile ember of hope burned steadily in his chest. The following morning, Alex awoke with the persistent weight of his realization still pressing on him. Sunlight struggled to filter through the thin blinds, illuminating dust particles that floated lazily in the air. He brewed a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the small kitchen, and as he sipped, his mind raced through the previous night's thoughts. Each tiny habit that had drained his time and money surfaced like ghosts in necessary takeout, orders, impulsive online purchases, hours wasted scrolling through feeds that offered distraction but no growth. They had all seemed harmless at the moment, almost comforting in their familiarity, but in truth, they had quietly been stealing from him. He opened his laptop and began a simple exercise. He listed every expenditure from the past month. No matter How minor. The numbers jumped off the screen like a revelation. $50 here, 30 there, 100 there, adding up to sums that could have been invested, saved, or redirected into personal growth. The realization cut deep not because he had failed, but because he had been blind to the patterns that had controlled him. Awareness, he understood, was not punishment. It was power. With his notebook beside him, Alex began cataloging not only financial drains, but also habits that sabotaged his progress in other areas. He had neglected his English learning, his reading, his networking, even his physical health, all in service of being busy rather than productive. The endless hustle had made him feel alive, but in reality, it had left him stagnant. His ambition had been noble, yet misguided, because effort alone could not overcome the silent thief. Only deliberate, conscious choices could. By mid-afternoon, a subtle shift had begun. Alex decided to take control of one small habit at a time. He turned off notifications on his phone, deleted apps that distracted him, and set a timer for focus work. He made a plan to cook simple meals instead of buying takeout, and committed to spending 30 minutes daily on his English course. Each small adjustment felt like a drop of water filling a parched vessel. Slowly, he began to sense the potential of reclaiming his time, energy, and resources. The mental transformation was equally profound. For the first time, Alex felt a sense of clarity and agency. The silent thief was still present, but he was no longer invisible. Each day became a deliberate battle, fought not with brute force, but with conscious awareness. Alex understood that wealth, in its truest sense, was not just money in a bank account, but the freedom to direct his life with intention, to transform habits into assets rather than liabilities, and to build a foundation strong enough to carry him through the uncertainties of the future. As the evening descended, the apartment no longer felt suffocating. The lamp's light cast a warm glow, and Alex leaned back, reflecting on the changes he had already made. It was not about perfection or instant transformation. It was about reclaiming control, one decision at a time. The silent thief would not disappear overnight, but with vigilance, awareness, and consistency, it could be confronted, challenged, and ultimately overcome. And in that moment, Alex realized that the fight was not against circumstance, luck, or fate. It was against himself, against habits that had silently dictated his life for far too long. For the first time, he felt hope, purposeful and tangible, like a fragile but unbreakable ember waiting to ignite. The days that followed tested Alex in ways he hadn't anticipated. Awareness was one thing, but action was another. Old habits whispered like ghosts, coaxing him back into comfort and distraction. A tempting ad for a new gadget flashed across his screen, promising satisfaction he didn't need but felt he deserved. A coworker invited him to a spontaneous lunch that would have meant extra spending. Social media feeds buzzed endlessly, offering the allure of endless entertainment. Every temptation was a subtle challenge, a reminder of how entrenched his habits had become. Yet Alex was changing. He paused before giving in, breathing deeply, reminding himself of the quiet, accumulating power of small choices. Each time he resisted, he felt a surge of control, a confidence that was unfamiliar but intoxicating. Slowly, he began to understand a fundamental truth. Freedom wasn't about eliminating desire or never indulging. It was about conscious choice. The habits that had held him back were not invincible. They were patterns that could be observed, acknowledged, and reshaped. Every moment of restraint became a small victory, a brick laid in the foundation of a new life. In the evenings, Alex returned to his English learning and personal growth exercises with a renewed sense of purpose. Words that had once felt cumbersome now carried weight. Each sentence he wrote, each concept he grasped, felt like a tool in his arsenal. The silent thief had robbed him of his time before, but now every hour spent learning, reflecting, or planning was a reclamation of power. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but each day compounded the last, creating momentum he had never experienced before. Financially, the changes were equally tangible. He began tracking expenses meticulously, understanding not only where money went, but why. Patterns emerged. Small leaks that had seemed harmless now revealed their true cost. With awareness came control, and with control came freedom. The once overwhelming pile of bills and obligations no longer felt like a mountain, but a series of challenges that could be tackled strategically. Every small savings, every intentional investment, Every avoided impulse purchase became a testament to his growing discipline. Emotionally, Alex felt lighter, more in command of his life. The anxiety that had once lurked in the corners of his mind began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. He realized that wealth was never just about accumulation. It was about mastery over oneself. The silent thief was not some external force, it had been his own habits, nurtured over years of unconscious living, and now, for the first time, he was learning to master them. He understood that transformation was neither instant nor easy, but every conscious choice built resilience, every small victory reinforced purpose, and every habit replaced with intention became a step toward freedom. Alex was no longer just surviving. He was awakening. Each morning brought not dread, but opportunity. Each decision, no matter how small, carried weight. He was becoming the architect of his life, aware that the silent thief was still lurking, yet confident that with vigilance and conscious action, it could be confronted and ultimately overcome. And as he drifted to sleep, the ember of hope that had sparked days ago now glowed steadily, promising a future that was no longer dictated by unseen habits, but shaped by deliberate, empowering choice. His apartment, once cluttered with unpaid bills and unopened books, now felt calmer, more intentional. Every object had a purpose, every corner of his space reflected a conscious choice, yet the most profound changes were internal. He felt lighter, more focused, and increasingly aware of the invisible forces that had dictated his life for so long. The silent thief, which had seemed unstoppable, was losing its grip. Evenings became a time of reflection. Alex would sit with a cup of tea, reviewing his day, writing down successes and failures alike. The victories were often small, resisting an impulse buy, completing a chapter in his English course, or dedicating an hour to planning his finances. The failures were instructive moments when old habits whispered too loudly, when he gave in to distraction, or when procrastination crept in despite his best intentions. Rather than discouragement, these failures fueled determination. Each misstep was a reminder that transformation required persistence, patience, and unwavering self-awareness. Alex also began to see patterns in others, friends, co-workers, even strangers. Many were trapped in the same cycle he had been, blindsided by the silent thief. He noticed colleagues complaining about money yet spending impulsively, friends lamenting missed opportunities yet refusing to invest in learning, family members caught in the endless tug-of-war between desire and discipline. The realization was humbling. These habits were universal, subtle, and powerful. But if awareness was the key, then he had found the map to escape the cycle. Financial discipline became a daily ritual. Alex tracked every dollar, questioned every expense, and set micro goals that, over time, compounded into measurable progress. Each saved dollar felt like reclaiming a fragment of his freedom, and each small investment in himself, be it a book, an online course, or a moment of focused learning, became a deposit into the account of his future. He began to understand that the real wealth lay not in the balance of his bank account, but in the mastery of his habits, the control over his impulses, and the clarity of his intentions. The emotional journey was equally transformative. Alex felt pride, yes, but more than that, he felt resilience. He knew the silent thief would continue to tempt, to whisper, to test his resolve, but he now had tools to counteract it. Self-awareness, deliberate choice, and consistent action became his armor. Each day reinforced the principle that change was not a momentary effort, but a lifelong commitment. By committing to conscious living, he was no longer a passive victim of circumstance. He was an active architect of his destiny. As Parford drew to a close, Alex looked around his apartment, then back at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was the same in appearance, but fundamentally changed within, determined, vigilant, and purposeful. He now understood that the silent thief was not an external enemy. It had always been the unexamined choices, the unnoticed patterns, and the unconscious habits that he had allowed to control his life. And for the first time, he felt truly free, not because life had become easier, but because he had become aware, intentional, and empowered. Hope was no longer a fragile ember. It had grown into a steady flame, illuminating the path toward wealth, growth, and lasting freedom. The following weeks tested Alex in ways he hadn't anticipated. Awareness alone was not enough. Old habits lingered like shadows, ready to pull him back into the patterns of complacency. A tempting online ad promised instant satisfaction, a gadget he didn't need but longed for in a moment of weakness. Social media offered endless distraction, with feeds filled with other people's successes and adventures, subtly provoking envy and self-doubt. Friends invited him to spontaneous outings, each one threatening to derail his new disciplined routine. The silent thief, persistent and cunning, was never far away, yet Alex was changing. Each time he resisted an impulse, each time he paused to make a conscious choice rather than act on habit, a quiet sense of power grew within him. He realized that freedom wasn't about avoiding pleasure, it was about intentionality. The choices that had once seemed minor now carried weight. Every conscious decision became a step toward reclaiming control over his life, and every time he succeeded, no matter how small, it reinforced a new belief. He was capable of shaping his own destiny. Alex's mornings became sacred. He would wake early, not out of obligation, but with purpose, coffee in hand. He would review his goals, study English, and plan his day with precision. The process itself became motivating. Each completed task, each mindful choice, was evidence that the silent thief's influence was waning. He began to notice improvements in unexpected ways: clearer thinking, better communication at work, confidence in conversations, and a subtle reduction in anxiety. His finances, once a source of constant stress, now offered him a sense of control. Rather than despair, evening reflections became more profound. Alex reviewed not just his financial decisions, but his emotional and mental habits. He examined moments of distraction, understanding the triggers and emotions behind them. He wrote about his progress, celebrated victories, and dissected failures without judgment. This practice of self-awareness became a daily ritual, strengthening his ability to anticipate challenges and respond with intention. Each day, he felt a deeper sense of empowerment. The silent thief still lurked, but its power diminished with every choice he made. Alex had transformed his relationship with himself and with his habits. He realized that the journey was ongoing and that vigilance was the price of freedom. Yet the fear, frustration, and helplessness that had once dominated his life were giving way to hope, purpose, and clarity. He understood now that wealth, true wealth, was not only measured in money, but in mastery over oneself. The ability to recognize invisible drains, confront them, and replace them with deliberate, intentional action. Alex's ember of hope had grown into a steady flame, illuminating the path to a future defined not by circumstance, but by conscious choice, resilience, and unwavering determination. As weeks turned into months, Alex began noticing subtle but profound shifts in his daily life. The apartment that had once been cluttered with bills, unopened books, and neglected belongings now felt intentional and alive. Each object, each corner, reflected conscious decision-making, but the real transformation was internal. The once invisible habits that had drained his time, money, and energy were now fully illuminated in his awareness, and with awareness came power. He realized that the silent thief had never been an external force. It had been his own unexamined choices, his unconscious routines, and the habits he had allowed to dominate without scrutiny. Morning rituals became sacred acts of empowerment. He woke early, coffee in hand, reviewing his goals with precision, spending dedicated time on his English studies, personal development, and financial planning. The days that had once blurred into each other with monotonous effort now held purpose. Alex had begun tracking every dollar, analyzing each expense, identifying patterns, and finding opportunities to reclaim lost resources. Small victories, a dollar saved here, an hour spent learning there, accumulated like bricks, forming the foundation of a new life. Yet, transformation was neither linear nor easy. Old habits whispered at the edges of his consciousness, the temptation to indulge, to procrastinate, to follow the familiar path of ease, never fully disappeared. Social media offered distractions, advertisements tempted impulses, and the comfort of old routines beckoned like a siren. But Alex responded differently now. He paused before acting, reflected on his true intentions, and chose consciously. Each act of discipline reinforced a growing inner strength, a belief that he could shape his own future. Emotionally, Alex felt a newfound lightness. Anxiety that had once weighed heavily in his chest began to lift. Decisions no longer carried the suffocating weight of uncertainty, and small accomplishments offered genuine satisfaction. He began to understand that wealth, in its truest form, was not simply money in the bank, but mastery over oneself, control over habits, focus, and choices. The silent thief had robbed him of potential for years, but now each conscious decision became a reclaiming of power, a step toward freedom that he could see, feel, and measure. Evenings were devoted to reflection, journaling, and strategy. Alex celebrated victories, analyzed mistakes, and strengthened the mental muscles that would keep the silent thief at bay. The process was iterative, requiring patience and persistence, but each cycle brought him closer to clarity and control. He realized that true transformation demanded consistency, awareness, and deliberate effort. The ember of hope that had sparked weeks earlier now glowed steadily, a flame fueled by conscious living, determination, and the understanding that the silent thief could never take what was intentionally guarded and nurtured. Alex had become a different person not because his circumstances had instantly changed, but because his relationship with himself and his habits had. He had learned that wealth was cultivated through vigilance, self-awareness, and deliberate action, and that freedom was not granted, it was earned one conscious choice at a time. The silent thief remained, lurking, but Alex no longer feared it. He had discovered the antidote: awareness, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to intentional living, and with that knowledge, he felt ready to confront the world, armed with the power of choice, resilience, and a vision of the life he was determined to build. Alex began to notice the subtler rewards of his deliberate choices. It was no longer just the savings in his bank account or the pages of his English book completed, but the confidence that grew quietly, almost imperceptibly, in his mind. Each decision he made intentionally reinforced a growing sense of control over his life, like a musician perfecting scales in solitude until they could perform effortlessly. He understood that mastery over habits was not glamorous or dramatic. It was patient, repetitive, and almost invisible in its accumulation, but its power was undeniable. He encountered moments that tested him deeply. An unexpected work expense threatened to undo weeks of financial discipline, and old impulses tugged at his will, whispering that he deserved an immediate reward. Friends planned a spontaneous night out, and social media flaunted lifestyles that seemed effortless, feeding insecurities he had long carried. Each temptation was a mirror reflecting the old Alex, the one who had surrendered to small indulgences and let habits quietly dictate his life. But now, he responded differently. He paused, breathed, and reminded himself of the vision he was building: a life of freedom, intentionality, and purpose. Alex began to understand the psychological roots of the silent thief. It was not merely about money or productivity. It was about comfort, distraction, and the subtle human tendency to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term gain. The thief thrived in these blind spots, feeding on unexamined routines and habits that felt harmless, but awareness acted like a spotlight, exposing its movements, neutralizing its influence, and allowing him to act with intention. Every deliberate choice became a declaration. He would no longer surrender unconsciously to the patterns that had held him back. The small victories began to compound in remarkable ways. Daily savings accumulated into noticeable funds, and hours once lost to mindless scrolling transformed into learning, skill building, and self-improvement. Alex felt the growth not just in numbers or knowledge, but in himself. Mental clarity sharpened, emotional resilience strengthened, and self-confidence surged. He discovered that the most profound wealth came not from external gains, but from the mastery of self. Control over habits was the currency of freedom, and he was now wealthy in ways he had never imagined. Evenings became moments of reflection and gratitude. Alex documented his journey, celebrating each triumph and examining each slip without judgment. He realized that transformation was iterative, a continuous process requiring awareness, discipline, and persistence. The silent thief had been relentless, but Alex was relentless in observation, relentless in conscious choice, and relentless in the commitment to reclaiming his life. He understood a crucial truth: freedom was not a destination, but a practice, and wealth was not simply a bank balance, but the mastery of the mind, habits, and daily decisions. And for the first time, Alex felt truly alive, awake to his power, vigilant against old patterns, and ready to continue the journey toward a life defined by intention, choice, and purpose. Over time, Alex began noticing the subtle ways his newfound awareness transformed the world around him. His relationships improved as he became more intentional with his time and energy, offering presence instead of distraction. Conversations with friends no longer revolved around complaints or comparison. They centered on growth, ideas, and meaningful connection. Colleagues noticed his focus, his reliability, and the quiet confidence he carried. The silent thief which had once whispered through small, unnoticed habits, had lost its power, and Alex was now living proof of the strength that awareness and deliberate choice could cultivate. Financially, he experienced small but meaningful breakthroughs. The dollars saved from previous impulsive spending now compounded, creating a tangible sense of security and possibility. Investments, once intimidating, became opportunities to further grow both knowledge and wealth. Each conscious decision was a declaration that he would not be enslaved by unconscious patterns any longer. Alex discovered that money, while a tool, was secondary to the mastery of himself. The freedom he sought was not in accumulation alone, but in the disciplined, purposeful approach to every aspect of life. Even challenges that had once felt overwhelming now became opportunities for reflection and growth. Unexpected bills, missed deadlines, and personal setbacks no longer triggered despair. Instead, Alex paused, assessed, and acted with clarity and intention. He learned that the silent thief thrived on reaction and habit, but awareness and deliberate choice were its antidotes. Every time he chose mindfully over impulsively, he reclaimed a fragment of the life he had unconsciously surrendered for years. Emotionally, Alex felt a deep sense of fulfillment that money alone could never provide. Confidence, resilience, and clarity replaced anxiety, self-doubt, and helplessness. He discovered that transformation was not an event, but a process, a continuous series of small victories that, over time, compounded into a life of empowerment. Each day reinforced the truth that wealth was not external, but internal. Mastery over habits, conscious decision-making, and unwavering commitment to intentional living. Alex understood that the silent thief could never fully disappear. It would always test him, always tempt him, but he also knew that with vigilance, awareness, and consistent action, he could live above its influence. The ember of hope that had first sparked weeks ago now burned steadily, illuminating a path to financial stability, personal growth, and emotional freedom. Alex was no longer merely surviving. He was thriving. Every conscious choice, every discipline, habit, every small victory was a testament to the power of awareness and the potential that lay within. Deliberate living. He had discovered the secret that had eluded him for so long. Freedom was a practice. Wealth was cultivated through mastery of self, and the life he desired was no longer a distant dream. It was being built, moment by moment, with purpose, intention, and unwavering resolve. Alex began noticing that the changes he was making were no longer confined to his own life. They were rippling outward, touching every aspect of his world. His morning routines, once private acts of discipline, began influencing his friends and colleagues. They noticed the clarity in his communication, the steadiness in his focus, the confidence that seemed to radiate effortlessly. Conversation shifted from complaining about circumstances to discussing possibilities, strategies, and learning. The silent thief, once invisible and insidious, had lost its quiet control over not just his actions, but his presence. Financially, Alex felt the long-term impact of his conscious choices. Savings that had once felt marginal now accumulated into substantial security. Investments, small at first, began showing the compounding power of consistent, thoughtful action. The freedom that money provided was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, a living testament to the power of awareness and deliberate habit. Alex realized that the silent thief thrived not on big, obvious mistakes, but on the accumulation of countless tiny decisions made without attention. By reclaiming these small moments, he had begun building an unshakable foundation for the life he desired. The internal transformation mirrored the external. Alex's confidence soared, but it was no longer the brittle, fragile confidence of superficial achievement. This was a grounded, steady assurance that came from knowing he could trust himself to act intentionally. When temptation rose, whether a shiny new gadget, an invitation to a spontaneous night out, or the lure of mindless scrolling, he responded with calm discernment. Each conscious choice reinforced his independence from unconscious habits. Each refusal, each measured action became a small victory, quietly building momentum toward long-term freedom. Alex also began to mentor himself in subtle ways, journaling reflections and lessons learned from failures and victories alike. He studied patterns in his own behavior, predicting triggers, and designing preemptive strategies to navigate them. He realized that success was not a single dramatic act, but a continuous series of mindful decisions, each one reinforcing the next. The silent thief could appear at any moment, but awareness, discipline, and intentionality were his antidotes. By the end of Part 9, Alex had crossed an invisible threshold. He was no longer merely fighting habits, he was mastering them. Each day offered opportunities to practice conscious living, to reclaim lost ground, and to build toward a future defined not by circumstance, but by intention. Hope was no longer a fleeting ember, it had become a steady flame, a beacon guiding him through challenges and triumphs alike. Alex understood that wealth, freedom, and fulfillment were cultivated one choice at a time, and that the life he had imagined was no longer a dream. It was being built, brick by brick, through deliberate action, self-awareness, and the unyielding resolve to never again surrender to the silent thief. As the months progressed, Alex began experiencing a profound shift in how he perceived both time and money. Every minute became precious, every decision deliberate. He no longer wasted energy on fleeting distractions or impulsive indulgences. The silent thief, once an invisible predator that fed on unconscious habits, was now powerless against his vigilance. Each choice he made, whether to invest, save, learn, or rest, carried intentional weight. Alex understood that small, consistent actions were far more powerful than sporadic bursts of effort, and that mastery over daily habits was the gateway to lasting freedom. He began to notice the subtle rewards that conscious living brought. His energy levels stabilized, his focus sharpened, and his mental clarity allowed him to solve problems he once considered insurmountable. The anxiety that had shadowed him for years began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence born from competence and self-discipline. Financial decisions became less reactive and more strategic. He began allocating resources to areas that created long-term value, whether through investments, education, or skill development. Each dollar spent or saved became a conscious act, a reflection of his priorities rather than a response to fleeting desire. Alex's internal landscape transformed in tandem with his external circumstances. The habits that had silently robbed him of energy and potential were replaced by routines designed to cultivate growth, resilience, and wealth. Mornings became rituals of preparation and intention, evenings periods of reflection and planning, and every hour in between was an opportunity to act purposefully. The world, once chaotic and overwhelming, now felt navigable. Every challenge, every temptation, every unexpected expense was an opportunity to exercise conscious choice, reinforcing the discipline that had become his shield. Even relationships began to flourish under the influence of his transformation. Friends and colleagues noticed his steadiness, his reliability, and the intentionality with which he navigated life. Conversations shifted from complaints and distractions to strategy, growth, and learning. His presence inspired others, demonstrating that change was not only possible, but achievable through persistent awareness and deliberate action. Alex realized that the silent thief affected everyone, but mastery over habits, self-awareness, and conscious living could liberate not just himself, but also influence those around him. Alex had firmly established a new paradigm in his life. He was no longer a passive participant, allowing habits and unconscious impulses to dictate his destiny. He was the architect of his own future, wielding awareness, discipline, and intentionality like tools to shape his life. The silent thief had been exposed, its influence diminished by vigilance and consistent action. Hope, once a fragile ember, now blazed steadily within him, illuminating the path to financial security, emotional resilience, and personal freedom. Alex knew the journey was ongoing, that vigilance would always be required, but he also understood that with conscious choice and persistent effort, the life he had envisioned was no longer a distant dream. It was being built, day by day, decision by decision, habit by habit. With each passing day, Alex began to notice not just the external changes in his life, but the profound internal shifts that accompanied them. The anxiety that had once lurked in the corners of his mind, the subtle tension he had carried for years, was slowly dissolving. Decisions no longer came with a heavy weight of uncertainty. He acted deliberately, with clarity and purpose. Each choice reinforced his growing sense of agency. The silent thief, which had thrived on unexamined habits and unconscious routines, was no longer a master of his life. It had been exposed, and in its exposure, its power diminished. Alex's mornings became sanctuaries of deliberate action. He greeted each day with a ritual, reviewing his goals, planning his finances, and dedicating time to personal growth and English studies. Each completed task, each small victory, built momentum The compounding effect was both subtle and undeniable. What had once been small wins now shaped his confidence, his focus, and his ability to make larger, more impactful decisions. He understood that mastery over one's habits was not dramatic or flashy. It was quiet, persistent, and accumulative, like a river slowly carving its path through solid rock. Challenges continued to appear, testing both his resolve and his discipline. Unexpected expenses, work stress, and the constant lure of distraction served as reminders that the silent thief was never truly gone, but Alex no longer feared it. Each temptation was an opportunity to exercise choice, each setback a lesson in resilience. Over time, he internalized a powerful truth: wealth and freedom were not merely about external circumstances, but about the ability to act consciously, to resist the pull of unexamined habits, and to cultivate the practices that would build lasting success. Even in his social interactions, Alex noticed a transformation. Friends who once casually indulged in distractions and overspending began seeking his perspective. His calm, deliberate approach inspired others to examine their own habits and choices. Alex realized that the silent thief was a universal challenge, one that affected nearly everyone, but also that deliberate action and awareness could break its hold. The knowledge that he could influence not only his own life, but also inspire others fueled his motivation, adding a deeper layer of purpose to every conscious decision. Alex had become a master of observation, reflection, and action. His habits, once his undoing, were now his allies. The silent thief had not disappeared, it still lingered, but Alex had learned its weaknesses, had developed the tools to counter it, and had cultivated the vigilance necessary to maintain control. He understood that life was a series of choices, each moment offering the opportunity to reinforce freedom, growth, and intentional living. And as he closed his journal each night, the flame of hope burned steadily, brighter than ever, illuminating the path to a life defined by mastery, discipline, and purposeful action. Alex had now entered a phase of his journey where the lessons of discipline, awareness, and intentional living were not just practices, but a way of life. He began to notice how far-reaching the effects of small, conscious decisions could be. What had once felt like minor adjustments, the timing of a meal, the choice to save $1, the decision to study an extra half-hour, had compounded into significant growth, both internally and externally. Every habit he consciously nurtured reinforced the foundation of freedom he was building. Brick by brick, the silent thief, which had once operated invisibly, now served as a mirror of his progress. Its old tricks, the lure of distraction, the whisper of indulgence, the pull of procrastination, were no longer effective. Alex had developed an almost instinctive awareness of the triggers that had once led him astray. Each temptation became a test of his intentionality, and every triumph over it was a reinforcement of his self-mastery. He realized that freedom was not granted by circumstance, but earned through consistent, deliberate choices that strengthened his mind, habits, and resolve. Emotionally, Alex felt a deep sense of empowerment. He had learned to separate desire from necessity, to discern between fleeting impulses and long-term growth. Each conscious decision brought with it a sense of accomplishment far more satisfying than momentary indulgence. The anxiety and frustration of the past had given way to a steady confidence and understanding that while challenges would arise, he possessed the tools to navigate them effectively. Wealth, he understood, was as much a product of self-mastery as it was a financial strategy. Alex also began to experiment with mentorship, sharing the principles he had learned with close friends and colleagues. He found joy in observing others awaken to their own potential, realizing that the silent thief was not just his adversary, but a universal challenge that everyone faced. By guiding others toward awareness and deliberate action, Alex strengthened his own commitment. Teaching, he discovered, amplified mastery. Explaining the principles of conscious living required deeper reflection, and solidified his practices. By the end of Part 12, Alex had transformed his life into a series of intentional acts. Each moment was purposeful, each habit reinforcing his independence from unconscious impulses, and each day a testament to the power of awareness and persistence. The silent thief remained a shadow in the background, a reminder of past struggles. But its grip was broken. Alex's life was now defined by conscious choice, disciplined action, and the steady cultivation of freedom, wealth, and self-mastery. He had discovered the secret that had eluded him for so long. The path to lasting success lay in the small, deliberate decisions made consistently over time. until they became the foundation of a life lived intentionally, fully, and powerfully. As Alex's journey progressed, he began noticing subtler, yet profound, transformations in his mindset and perception. The world no longer appeared as a series of external pressures dictating his choices. Instead, he saw clearly how his habits and decisions shaped every outcome. Each day became a canvas, and every deliberate action a brushstroke painting the life he desired. The silent thief, which had once silently controlled his finances, time, and energy, had been rendered powerless by consistent awareness, reflection, and intentionality. Its influence had been replaced by conscious design, and for the first time, Alex felt a deep sense of control over his destiny. Financially, Alex's life began to reflect the disciplined habits he had cultivated. Savings grew steadily, not through luck or windfalls, but through careful planning and intentional decisions. He invested in opportunities that aligned with his long-term goals, understanding that real wealth was generated not by sporadic gains, but through consistent, mindful action. Each dollar managed deliberately was a declaration of independence from the unconscious habits that had kept him stagnant. He felt empowered knowing that financial freedom was no longer a distant aspiration, it was an unfolding reality shaped by every conscious choice he made. The silent thief's influence, though diminished, was never entirely gone. Occasional temptations tested Alex, whether in the form of unplanned purchases, time-wasting distractions, or the pull of old routines. But he responded differently now. He paused, reflected, and chose intentionally every small victory over. These temptations reinforced a growing resilience and strengthened his inner sense of self-mastery. Alex realized that the battle was ongoing, that vigilance was required, but he also understood that each act of conscious choice was a reinforcement of his freedom and a step closer to the life he envisioned. Emotionally, the changes were equally transformative. Alex felt an increasing sense of clarity, calm, and confidence. Decisions no longer carried the weight of fear or uncertainty. They were guided by principles, awareness, and foresight. Each action became an affirmation of his ability to shape his life rather than be shaped by circumstance. He began to understand that wealth, time, and personal growth were intricately connected to the habits he cultivated and the awareness he maintained. The silent thief had taught him that neglecting small, daily choices allowed unseen forces to control his life, but deliberate attention could reclaim that power. Alex had moved beyond mere survival or reaction. He had embraced a life of conscious creation, understanding that each choice, no matter how small, had significance. The silent thief was no longer a master, but a shadow, a reminder of past limitations and the vigilance required to maintain freedom. Alex now carried the knowledge that intentional living, disciplined habits, and consistent awareness were the keys to wealth, freedom, and fulfillment. The ember of hope had grown into a steady, guiding flame, illuminating a path that promised growth, resilience, and mastery in every area of his life. He had discovered that the true power lay not in external circumstances, but in the conscious, deliberate, and persistent cultivation of his own habits, decisions, and mindset. By now, Alex had reached a level of awareness where every action, no matter how small, carried weight. He noticed that even the most ordinary moments offered opportunities to reinforce intentional living. Making breakfast became a mindful ritual. Checking his accounts was no longer anxiety-inducing, but empowering. Reading a chapter in his English book was a deliberate act of self-investment. The silent thief, which had once infiltrated his life unnoticed, was now a distant echo, powerless against the structure and vigilance he had cultivated. His life was no longer dictated by unconscious habits. It was a product of deliberate, meaningful choices. Financially, the results were undeniable. The once overwhelming pile of bills and obligations had been transformed into a clear, manageable system. Alex's disciplined saving, mindful spending, and strategic investments created a tangible sense of security and potential. But more than the numbers, it was the empowerment he felt that was transformative. He understood that true wealth was not just accumulation, it was control, awareness, and the capacity to direct one's resources with purpose. Each conscious financial decision became a statement. He would no longer be held hostage by the habits of his past. Temptations still appeared, as they always would, but Alex's response had fundamentally changed. Instead of reacting impulsively, he observed, reflected, and acted intentionally. The once powerful pull of distraction, instant gratification, or mindless indulgence had lost its grip. Every conscious choice reinforced his independence from the silent thief, and with each victory, he felt his resilience grow stronger. Alex realized that freedom was not the absence of challenges, but the ability to navigate them with awareness, discipline, and deliberate intention. Emotionally, Alex felt a profound sense of calm and purpose. The constant tension and anxiety of his past life had been replaced by a grounded confidence, a steady assurance that he could navigate challenges, resist temptation, and continue growing. He understood that the habits and routines he had consciously built were his armor against unconscious failure, and each day reinforced the truth that mastery over self was the true source of freedom and wealth. The silent thief, once a formidable adversary, had become a symbol of the past, a reminder of how far he had come and the vigilance required to maintain his progress. By the end of Part 14, Alex had internalized a powerful, life-changing lesson: wealth, freedom, and fulfillment were not determined by external circumstances, luck, or chance. They were cultivated in the quiet, consistent practice of conscious choice, deliberate action, and disciplined habit building. The flame of hope that had first sparked months ago now burned as a guiding light, illuminating a path of growth, resilience, and mastery. Alex had discovered the secret that had eluded him. For so long, the silent thief could never take what was intentionally guarded and nurtured. And in that realization, he found not just freedom, but empowerment, purpose, and a profound sense of self-mastery that would guide him for the rest of his life. By the time Alex reached this stage of his journey, his transformation was evident not just to himself, but to everyone around him. His once scattered life had become a reflection of deliberate design. Each decision, habit, and action aligned with his goals and values. The silent thief, which had once invisibly drained his energy, focus, and resources, now existed only as a reminder of past vulnerability. Alex had reclaimed control, not through luck or sudden breakthroughs, but through consistent, conscious, and intentional choices that compounded over time. Financially, Alex's life was no longer a struggle. The security he had built, both through disciplined savings and strategic investments, gave him freedom and options he had never imagined. Yet he understood that the true victory was not in numbers, it was in the mindset, the awareness, and the habits that made wealth sustainable. Each dollar managed intentionally, each hour devoted to learning and growth, became a brick in the foundation of a life defined by purpose and choice rather than reaction and unconscious patterns. Challenges continued to appear, as life always presents, but Alex's response had fundamentally changed. Where he once felt anxiety, frustration, or fear, he now met obstacles with calm determination. The silent thief's whispers no longer dictated his actions. He listened, reflected, and acted deliberately. Each triumph over temptation reinforced his confidence, each careful decision strengthened his resilience, and each day lived intentionally became a testament to the power of awareness and disciplined action. Emotionally, Alex experienced a deep, grounding sense of fulfillment. The restless worry, self-doubt, and regret that had once plagued him were replaced by clarity, purpose, and unwavering resolve. He understood that his growth had not been linear. There had been setbacks, distractions, and moments of doubt, but that each challenge had been a stepping stone, shaping the habits, mindset, and awareness that now defined him. The silent thief had taught him his lessons, that neglect, distraction, and unconscious choices would always steal potential unless countered with vigilance, reflection, and deliberate action. By the end of Part 15, Alex's journey had come full circle. He was no longer a passive participant in his life. He had become the conscious architect of his destiny, wielding awareness, discipline, and intentionality as tools to shape his future. The flame of hope, once fragile, now burned steadily and brightly, illuminating the path toward freedom, wealth, and self-mastery. Alex understood that the silent thief could never reclaim what was intentionally guarded. Through deliberate choice, consistent habits, and persistent awareness, he had built a life of purpose, resilience, and empowerment, a life that reflected the true meaning of freedom, not as a distant dream, but as an ever-growing reality. And in that realization, Alex felt a profound sense of triumph. The silent thief was gone, and he had become the master of his own life. Alex sat at his cluttered desk, the glow of his laptop illuminating a small, chaotic corner of his apartment. The half-empty coffee mug beside him had long gone cold, but he barely noticed. For years, this scene had repeated itself minutes, turned into hours, hours into days, all consumed by the relentless pull of distractions, scrolling feeds, impulse purchases, and fleeting comforts. Each small indulgence had seemed insignificant, harmless even, yet cumulatively. They had quietly stolen time, focus, and money, building invisible barriers between him and the life he desired. He remembered the first time the truth hit him. It was a mundane evening as he mindlessly scrolled through social media, eyes glazed over, heart racing from the highs of likes and notifications. Somewhere between advertisements promising instant satisfaction and friends' posts flaunting success, a sinking realization emerged. He had allowed small impulses, tiny, daily indulgences to dictate his life. Each minor decision, each fleeting pleasure, had compounded over the years into habits that stole his energy, derailed his goals, and silently dictated the trajectory of his future. The revelation was both painful and liberating. He could no longer blame circumstances or luck. The thief was himself, hiding in the allure of immediate gratification, determined to change. Alex began experimenting with deliberate delay. He started with something as small as resisting the temptation to check his phone the moment he felt boredom. Instead, he paused, drew a deep breath, and asked himself, will this action bring me closer to my goal or take me further away? The first attempts were surprisingly difficult. Impulses that had once been automatic now demanded conscious effort to resist. Each time he succumbed, he felt the pang of regret. Each victory, no matter how minor, sparked a quiet thrill of empowerment. The initial struggle was exhausting, but the small wins were addictive in a profoundly different way, fulfilling not for their momentary pleasure, but for their alignment with a deeper vision of his life. Days passed, and Alex began to notice subtle shifts. The hours previously consumed by mindless scrolling were now available for study, personal development, and reflection. He began reading books on finance and self-growth, writing in journals, and experimenting with small financial strategies. The tiny victories over impulsive choices added up in ways he had never imagined. Savings began to grow incrementally, focus sharpened, and a sense of mental clarity settled in, a clarity that had been absent in his life for years. The silent thief of instant gratification, which had fed invisibly on unconscious habits, was slowly losing its power over him. Emotionally, Alex experienced waves of both challenge and exhilaration. The pull of old habits was strong, and moments of weakness reminded him of how long he had been unconsciously surrendered to fleeting pleasures. Yet, with every intentional choice, his confidence grew. Delaying gratification no longer felt restrictive. It felt like reclaiming ownership of his life. He realized that freedom was not the absence of temptation, but the ability to navigate it consciously with awareness and intentional action. Each pause, each reflective moment, each deliberate choice reinforced the understanding that he could master his impulses and build the life he had dreamed of for so long. Alex had taken the first crucial steps toward breaking the grip of instant gratification. The path ahead was not easy. It demanded persistent vigilance, conscious awareness, and repeated practice. Yet the power of deliberate choice began to unfold, revealing a life where decisions were not reactive but intentional, where satisfaction came not from fleeting indulgences, but from the enduring rewards of purposeful action. Alex understood that the key to turning dreams into reality was consistent alignment of daily actions, with long-term vision. And with this awakening, a small but blazing flame of hope ignited within him, guiding him forward into a life defined by discipline, intention, and the quiet, profound triumph over the silent thief of instant gratification. The next morning, Alex awoke to the soft glow of sunrise filtering through his apartment window. The warmth of the light felt symbolic, almost like a quiet encouragement, as if the day itself was whispering a reminder that change was possible. He remembered the restless nights, the countless hours squandered in pursuit of fleeting satisfaction, and the gnawing sense that time itself had slipped through his fingers. Today, however, felt different. Today, he intended to act with purpose. The silent thief of instant gratification, which had thrived on his unawareness, would find no easy prey in him. Alex's first test came almost immediately. A notification popped up on his phone, promising a limited-time deal on a gadget he had been eyeing for weeks. His thumb hovered over the screen, instinctively reaching for instant pleasure. But he paused. He visualized the consequences. The small amount of money, if saved instead, could contribute to his emergency fund or investment plan. He imagined the satisfaction of building wealth, the sense of pride in achieving long-term goals, and the fleeting thrill of the purchase suddenly seemed shallow and empty. With a steady breath, he swiped the notification away. The small act, seemingly trivial, carried a weight far greater than it appeared. It was a reclaiming of power, a tiny but decisive victory over the impulses that had once governed him. Throughout the day, Alex found countless moments of temptation. Co-workers offered lunch at an expensive restaurant. Social media beckoned with endless distractions, and the comfort of habitual indulgence whispered seductively in his ear. Each scenario was a test of his newfound awareness. He responded with deliberate choices. He packed a nutritious meal. Instead of giving in to the lure of fast food, he silenced notifications to focus on his studies, and he created pockets of quiet reflection to assess each decision before acting. By evening, he felt a growing sense of empowerment, a tangible shift in energy and focus that he had never experienced before. The pull of instant gratification no longer had the effortless power it once held over him. Emotionally, the process was both challenging and exhilarating. There were moments when he felt the old cravings, sharp and insistent, tempting him to revert to familiar habits. But Alex had learned to observe these urges without judgment, to acknowledge them, and then redirect his attention toward purposeful action. Each victory, no matter how small, reinforced his belief in his own capacity to control impulses. The silent thief, once an invisible force sapping his energy and resources, had begun to lose its grip. Alex had begun to experience the compounding effects of intentional living. Each small act of delayed gratification, each conscious decision, had created a ripple across his day. Time that had previously been lost to distractions was now spent learning, planning, and building a foundation for long-term success. The thrill of instant indulgence was gradually replaced by a deeper, more satisfying sense of accomplishment. Alex realized that the journey would be ongoing, filled with daily tests of awareness and discipline, but the victories he accumulated were proof that lasting change was possible. For the first time, he felt not just hopeful, but empowered, awake to the power of deliberate choice and ready to continue his journey toward a life defined not by fleeting pleasure, but by enduring purpose, focus, and fulfillment. By midweek, Alex's awareness of his impulses had grown sharper, almost like a sixth sense. He began noticing not just the obvious temptations, the flashy advertisements, social media alerts, or spontaneous purchases, but also the subtler forms of instant gratification that had long influenced his life. The urge to skip tasks, the temptation to indulge in idle gossip, the inclination to postpone difficult decisions, all of these had quietly stolen hours, productivity, and peace of mind over the years. The silent thief, he realized, wore many masks, and its power lay in its invisibility. One evening, as he sat in his small living room, Alex reflected on how much energy he had wasted chasing fleeting pleasures, the memories of empty hours squandered, opportunities, and the quiet frustration of knowing he could do more pressed heavily on his mind. He realized that the cost of instant gratification was not just money, or time, or lost productivity. It was the erosion of self-trust, discipline, and purpose. Every time he had surrendered to a whim, he had reinforced the very habits that kept him from building the life he wanted. That clarity hit him like a wave, awakening a determination so strong it left him almost breathless. Determined to act differently, Alex devised a simple yet powerful strategy. Each time he felt the pull of an impulse, he would pause, take 3 deep breaths, and visualize the long-term consequences of his choice. If indulging brought him closer to his goals, he acted. If it pulled him away, he resisted. This process, though seemingly small, required immense mental discipline. The first few attempts were exhausting. The old habits screamed for attention, tempting him with familiar comfort. But gradually, the act of pausing became a tool of empowerment, a way to reclaim control over his own decisions. Each conscious choice reinforced his ability to act intentionally, weakening the silent thief's grip on his life financially. The effects were noticeable even in the first week. Alex resisted small purchases that once seemed inconsequential: coffee from expensive cafes, impulsive online deals, snacks at convenience stores. Those small amounts, when redirected into savings or investments, began to accumulate. What had once been a trickle of wasted money now formed the first streams of his financial foundation. More importantly, he realized that true wealth was not simply in the numbers, but in the ability to govern one's impulses, make deliberate decisions, and act with foresight and purpose. Emotionally, Alex began to feel a growing sense of pride and self-trust, where he had once felt the pangs of regret for past indulgences. He now experienced the quiet satisfaction of self-mastery. Each victory over instant gratification was a declaration of autonomy, a signal that he could shape his life rather than be shaped by fleeting desires. The silent thief, which had once invisibly guided so many of his choices, was now confronted, challenged, and weakened. Each conscious act of restraint built momentum, reinforcing the belief that long-term fulfillment was achievable through consistent, deliberate effort. Alex had begun to experience the compounding effects of small victories. The hours once lost to distraction were reclaimed for learning, growth, and personal development. The money previously spent on impulsive pleasures was redirected toward meaningful investments in his future. And most importantly, he had begun to cultivate the most powerful resource of all, self-mastery. Alex realized that the journey would be ongoing, that daily vigilance was required. But the path was clear. Freedom, purpose, and fulfillment were no longer distant dreams. They were emerging realities, built one conscious choice at a time, fortified by patience, awareness, and deliberate action. As days turned into weeks, Alex began noticing a profound shift in his perception of time and desire. Each morning, as he opened his journal to plan the day ahead, he felt a sense of empowerment he had never known before. The invisible chains of instant gratification, the small, seemingly harmless impulses that had previously dictated his actions, were gradually being replaced with intentionality. He realized that true freedom did not come from indulging every desire, but from choosing which desires to honor and which to delay for a greater purpose. The test of his resolve came in subtle, almost cinematic moments. One afternoon, a friend called him to go out for a spontaneous dinner at a luxurious restaurant, one that would have meant spending more than he had allocated for the week. In the past, Alex would have agreed without hesitation, driven by the desire for immediate pleasure. This time, he paused. He visualized the consequences. The money could instead go toward an investment course he had been postponing, or toward strengthening his emergency fund. He politely declined the invitation, feeling a mix of discomfort and pride. The initial pang of missing out was real, but it was outweighed by the quiet satisfaction of aligning his actions with his long-term goals. Alex also noticed how instant gratification had previously eroded not just his finances, but his attention and creativity. Hours once lost to endless scrolling had drained his mental energy and dulled his focus. By deliberately resisting these impulses, he reclaimed time for learning, writing, and creative projects. He found himself more present in conversations, more engaged in problem-solving, and more capable of deep, uninterrupted thought. The silent thief had stolen not just money, but his potential, and by consciously acting, Alex was slowly recovering it emotionally. The journey was a roller coaster. There were moments of doubt when old habits whispered seductively, tempting him with the ease of giving in, but each time he resisted, he felt a growing sense of empowerment, a reinforcement of self-trust that no external pleasure could replicate. Alex realized that the struggle itself was a teacher. The discomfort of restraint was temporary, but the rewards of conscious action, confidence, clarity, and momentum were enduring. Each victory, no matter how small, compounded into a sense of invincibility against the fleeting demands of impulse. Financially, the results were becoming tangible. By delaying small indulgences, Alex accumulated savings that allowed him to invest in opportunities he had previously thought impossible. Each small victory over spending became a seed for future wealth. He understood now that financial freedom was not about occasional windfalls, but about repeated, deliberate choices that built steadily over time. The invisible force of instant gratification had been undermined by consistent discipline, and Alex's life was beginning to reflect the quiet power of intentionality. Alex had discovered a profound truth. The path to dreams was not paved with indulgence or fleeting pleasure, but with patience, awareness, and conscious action. Each day became a battlefield where he defended his focus, time, and resources against the subtle, persistent lure of the silent thief. Yet, in this struggle, he found exhilaration, growth, and empowerment. The life he once imagined as distant or impossible was now within reach, constructed moment by moment through disciplined choice and the steadfast refusal to surrender to the immediate satisfaction that had long controlled him. Alex knew the journey would continue, but he also knew that with each conscious decision, he was reclaiming his life, building his future, and mastering the art of turning dreams into reality. As Alex's journey continued, he became increasingly aware of how instant gratification had silently shaped his past life. It wasn't always flashy indulgences or obvious spending sprees. Often it was the small, almost imperceptible choices that chipped away at his focus, money, and long-term vision. Choosing to binge-watch a show instead of working on a personal project, delaying a study session for fleeting leisure, or giving into a snack that served no purpose other than momentary pleasure. All these little acts had compounded over time, building invisible barriers between him and the life he truly desired. One rainy evening, Alex found himself standing by the window, watching droplets trace patterns down the glass. The quiet of the storm gave him space to reflect deeply. He thought about the countless hours, dollars, and energy he had allowed to slip through his fingers. He saw the consequences of prioritizing comfort over discipline, impulsive pleasure over consistent effort, and yet, in that reflective moment, he also recognized the incredible potential that lay ahead. Awareness was the first step. Now that he saw the invisible thief for what it was, he could finally begin dismantling it piece by piece. Determined to act differently, Alex adopted a powerful technique: structured delays. Whenever he felt the urge to indulge in a desire that did not serve his long-term goals, he would pause, breathe, and visualize the outcomes of both choices. The first few times, the resistance felt almost unbearable. His mind screamed for immediate satisfaction, and the temptation seemed stronger than ever. But gradually, these pauses became tools of empowerment. With each deliberate delay, Alex strengthened his self-discipline, building an internal resilience that allowed him to resist stronger temptations in the future. Financially, the impact of these changes was undeniable. Every dollar he had previously spent on fleeting pleasures was now redirected to savings, investments, or skill building. The cumulative effect was remarkable. Small amounts, once wasted, began to grow into tangible results. Alex realized that financial security was not about sudden windfalls or luck. It was about the repeated, intentional decisions made consistently over time. Each act of restraint became a seed planted in the fertile soil of his future, destined to bear rewards far greater than the instant satisfaction he had once craved. Emotionally, the journey was both challenging and liberating. Alex experienced waves of temptation and doubt, yet with every victory, his confidence and self-trust grew stronger. He discovered a profound truth: the discomfort of restraint was temporary, but the satisfaction of building a life aligned with his goals was enduring. Each moment of conscious choice reinforced his belief in himself and his capacity to shape his own destiny. The silent thief of instant gratification had lost its dominion over him, replaced by deliberate action, self-awareness, and unwavering commitment to his vision. Alex had fully internalized the power of conscious decision-making. He knew that the journey was ongoing, filled with daily challenges, but he also understood that consistent, intentional action was the key to transforming dreams into reality. Time, money, and energy, the very resources that instant gratification had once drained, were now tools he wielded with purpose. The life he had imagined, once distant and hazy, was gradually taking shape, built moment by moment through deliberate, disciplined choices. Alex's understanding of the silent thief was now complete. It would always exist, always tempt, but it could never overcome the resolve of a mind committed to intentional living, patient growth, and the pursuit of lasting fulfillment. By now, Alex had begun to notice the patterns of his impulses in a new light. They were no longer random acts of indulgence. They were predictable signals, almost like alarms alerting him to the moments when he needed to exercise awareness and control. The pull of immediate satisfaction, whether it came in the form of scrolling endlessly, buying something unnecessary, or delaying a crucial task, was like a shadow that had long loomed over him. But with each conscious pause, each deliberate choice, Alex realized that the shadow had no substance. Its power was entirely dependent on his inattention, and now that he was awake to it, he could step past it. That afternoon, as he walked through a busy city street, the temptations of instant gratification were everywhere. Bright advertisements screamed for attention from store windows, social media notifications buzzed in his pocket, and the familiar urge to seek comfort in indulgence tried to lure him from his path. He stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, and visualized the future he wanted: financial independence, intellectual growth, emotional resilience, and a life rich with purpose. In that vision, none of the small temptations mattered. With renewed focus, he continued walking, undistracted, each step symbolizing the deliberate march toward a life built on intention rather than impulse. Financially, Alex's approach was evolving. He no longer merely resisted spending, he redirected it. Every dollar that could have been squandered on fleeting pleasure was now intentionally invested in tools, courses, and opportunities that expanded his skills and future earning potential. The impact was not instantaneous, but compounding. With each small decision, he was constructing a framework for long-term prosperity. He began to understand that the true wealth of life was built not in moments of indulgence, but in the careful, persistent allocation of resources toward growth, mastery, and long-term satisfaction. Emotionally, Alex was learning to embrace the tension that came with resisting temptation. Where he had once sought comfort to avoid discomfort, he now saw discomfort as a teacher, a signal that growth was occurring. Each moment of restraint strengthened not only his habits, but also his emotional resilience. He began to feel an almost exhilarating sense of control, a deep satisfaction that came not from indulgence, but from mastery. The silent thief of instant gratification, once so dominant in his life, had become powerless against a mind trained in awareness, foresight, and deliberate action. Alex had internalized a profound lesson. The pursuit of long-term goals required vigilance against the subtle, persistent lure of immediate pleasure. The daily practice of pausing, reflecting, and making intentional choices was shaping not only his habits, but his identity. He was no longer a passive participant in his life. He was an architect of his destiny. Every victory over impulse, no matter how small, added layers of strength, focus, and self-trust. The life he envisioned, once obscured by the haze of short-term gratification, was now steadily emerging into clarity, built step by step on the foundation of conscious, deliberate action. Alex knew that the journey would continue, but he also knew that he had gained the tools to navigate it successfully, and in that knowledge lay a freedom and empowerment he had never experienced before. The rain had just started falling when Alex ducked into a small cafe on his way home from work. The air was warm, rich with the scent of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries. His body instinctively relaxed. This was one of his favorite spots, the kind of place where he'd often treat himself after a stressful day. He looked at the display case. Golden croissants gleamed under soft yellow light, and a slice of chocolate cake seemed to whisper his name. For years, moments like this had followed a script. He would buy the treat, tell himself he deserved it for enduring a long, hard day, and enjoy the fleeting pleasure only to later feel the dull pang of regret when the expense showed up in his bank statement. But something was different. Tonight, as the rain tapped gently against the window, Alex paused. That word deserve echoed in his mind, heavier than before. How many times had it been used as a justification, a silent accomplice in his own sabotage? I worked hard. I deserve this. I've had a rough week. I deserve to relax. It's been stressful. I deserve to buy something nice. Deserve thinking, he realized, wasn't about fairness or balance. It was about granting himself permission to abandon discipline in the name of comfort. He sat down with a black coffee, deliberately skipping the pastry. As he sipped, he remembered something his grandfather once said: "Don't reward yourself for surviving life. Reward yourself for building it." That line had never fully landed until now. He saw how the culture around him, advertisements, friends, even social media influencers, fed into the belief that every difficulty must be countered with a purchase or indulgence. But the true reward for hard work wasn't a fleeting pleasure. It was the accumulation of choices that built a lasting, fulfilling life. In that moment, Alex felt a quiet rebellion rising in him. He no longer wanted to live at the mercy of instant rewards. He wanted to condition himself to feel gratification from progress, not consumption. That night, instead of spending on dessert, he transferred the same amount into his freedom fund, a small investment account he'd started a month earlier. The act felt strangely thrilling, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented: control over his own impulses, and a deeper awareness of the traps that had once held him captive. Walking home under the soft drizzle, Alex realized that breaking free from deserved thinking wasn't about depriving himself forever. It was about redefining what he truly deserved. He deserved financial security, the freedom to choose how he spent his days, the ability to help his family without hesitation. Those rewards would last far longer than any slice of cake could. The old script had been torn apart, replaced with a new narrative where discipline was not punishment, but liberation. And with each step, the rain seemed to wash away just a little more of the man he used to be. The Saturday morning sun spilled through the blinds, casting soft golden lines across Alex's modest living room. He sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through an online store. The cursor hovered over a pair of sneakers, clean, sleek, a brand he'd always admired. His old pair still worked fine, but these would feel good to wear. He told himself he needed them. He told himself they'd make him feel fresh, more confident. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't about necessity. It was about maintaining a version of himself that the world already accepted. This was the comfort zone economy, the silent marketplace where people spend money, not to improve their lives, but to keep everything exactly as it is. It wasn't about growth, but about maintaining the illusion of it. The more Alex thought about it, the more he saw how deeply embedded it was in his life. Friday night dinners at the same restaurants, upgrading his phone when the old one still worked perfectly, buying clothes not because he'd worn the old ones out, but because he feared looking behind in the eyes of others. The sneakers, like so many other purchases before, were a ticket to nowhere. He could see the cycle clearly now. Work hard, spend to maintain comfort, feel momentary satisfaction, and then return to the same spot, no richer, no freer, no closer to the life he dreamed about. Every cent spent on staying the same was a cent stolen from becoming something more. That afternoon, Alex made a different choice. He closed the laptop, grabbed a notepad, and walked to the small park down the street. Sitting on a bench, he wrote at the top of the page, comfort costs, growth. Below it, he listed every expense he made in the past month that didn't contribute to progress, things that didn't push him forward, didn't make him stronger, smarter, or freer. The list was longer than he expected, and with every item, the weight of realization pressed heavier on his chest. He thought of the people he admired, mentors, successful entrepreneurs, leaders. None of them had built their lives on comfort. Their investments were in skills, assets, networks, experiences that expanded their horizons, not ones that kept them in a pleasant loop. Alex felt a fire spark inside him. Maybe this was the turning point where he stopped being a loyal customer of the comfort zone and became an investor in his own growth. When he walked back home, the sneakers didn't matter anymore. The thrill of buying them had already faded in his mind, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing he'd chosen differently. He felt lighter, not because he had spent less, but because he had finally started asking the right question before every purchase. Will this move me forward or just keep me still? It was a rainy Thursday evening, and Alex sat by the window, listening to the steady rhythm of drops hitting the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks through the wet surface, and he absently stirred the last bit of sugar into his coffee he bought from the cafe across the street, just like he did every evening. It was habit now, a ritual. $3 here, $5 there, a muffin if he was hungry, an extra espresso shot when he felt tired. None of it seemed significant. In fact, the very reason he kept buying them was because they didn't feel like a big deal. Small pleasures, tiny splurges, barely worth noticing. But then his phone buzzed. It was a bank alert, low balance warning. The notification sat there, cold and blunt, as if it didn't care how hard he worked, how many late nights he stayed at the office, how many dreams he had for a better future. For the first time, Alex decided to actually do the math. He opened his banking app, pulled up the monthly statements, and began scrolling. Coffee, muffin, lunch at a corner deli, streaming subscription, another one, app purchase, ride share. It was like tracing the path of a slow leak in a bucket. You don't notice it at first, but give it time, and the whole thing is empty. $3.50 here, $7.5 there, $15.99 for a subscription he hadn't used in weeks. By the time he added them all up, his chest tightened. Nearly $400. Gone. Not from emergencies, not from big, necessary purchases, just from small, thoughtless, everyday expenses that didn't even add real value to his life. The rain outside seemed heavier now, almost in sync with the way he felt. He thought about how that $400 could have been invested, saved, or used for something that actually mattered. But instead, it had slipped through the cracks, drop by drop, without him even feeling it. That night, Alex set a new rule for himself. No more unplanned spending without asking, would I still buy this if it cost 10 times more? If the answer was no, then it wasn't worth even the small price. Because he finally understood poverty isn't always the result of one big mistake. Sometimes it's the death of 1,000 tiny cuts. The weekend had arrived, and Alex's phone was lighting up with messages in the group chat. His old college friends were back in town, and they wanted to hit one of the most expensive rooftop bars in the city. He hesitated. He'd just seen his low bank balance a few nights ago. The sting of that $400 leak still fresh in his mind. But as the messages kept coming, come on, man, it's been forever. You can't bail on us again. First round's on you. He felt that familiar pull, the fear of being the odd one out, the guy who couldn't keep up. An hour later, he was stepping out of a rideshare in front of a glittering glass tower, the city skyline blazing behind it. Inside, the bar was everything Instagram promised polished. Marble counters, gold accents, low moody lighting, and a DJ spinning just loud enough to make small talk feel exclusive. The menu was a minefield. Cocktails started at $18. The appetizers cost more than his weekly grocery bill. His friends were laughing, ordering rounds without even looking at the prices, their credit cards flashing like they belonged here. Alex laughed along, trying to ignore the creeping anxiety in his chest. Every time he tapped his card, he told himself it was just one night, but deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't paying for the drinks, the music, or the food. He was paying for permission to belong, permission to be seen as successful, as someone who hadn't fallen behind. When the bill arrived, his share was $172, a number that made his stomach twist. Nobody else flinched. They tossed in their cards, joked about after parties, and moved on. But Alex couldn't stop thinking about how long he'd have to work to earn back that night. How many hours of his life had just been traded away not for joy, but for an image. Walking home, the streets were quieter. Neon signs reflected off the wet pavement. He replayed the night in his mind and realized something. Approval bought with money is like sand. You can never hold enough to keep it from slipping away. That night, Alex promised himself that the next time he spent, it wouldn't be to impress a room full of people who wouldn't notice if he skipped around. He'd invest in memories that didn't come with a receipt, and in relationships that didn't require a credit card swipe. Because the most expensive thing in life isn't luxury, it's pretending to be someone you're not. The alarm clock buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but Alex didn't move right away. He lay there staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the paint like they were familiar roads on a map. He'd walked 100 times before. The same route, the same start, the same end. His morning routine was muscle memory: shower, toast, coffee from the corner cafe on the way to work. The cashier that knew his name and his order: medium latte, extra shot, 2 sugars. It was comforting, predictable, like a warm blanket against the sharp winds of an unpredictable world. He took the same bus every morning, sat in the same seat by the window, and watched the same storefronts roll by. He walked the same block to his office, bought lunch from the same deli at 12:15 p.m., and took his coffee break at 3 p.m. in the same spot by the vending machines. It all felt safe. And that safety was a trap, because every familiar step came with a hidden price tag. That daily latte, $5.50. The deli sandwich, $12.50. The vending machine snack, $2. Multiply that by weeks, months. Years. Money bled away invisibly while his life stayed exactly the same. But it wasn't just about dollars. It was about the invisible ceiling he'd built over his own head. He convinced himself that sticking to what he knew kept him from making mistakes. In reality, it kept him from making progress. One Tuesday, it hit him harder than usual. The bus had broken down, forcing everyone off onto a street Alex had never walked before. He saw a co-working cafe buzzing with freelancers, people tapping away at laptops, sketching designs, holding meetings over coffee. He'd never noticed it because he'd never taken this street. That night, sitting on his couch, he realized the truth. Comfort zones don't just keep you safe, they keep you still. They convince you that the slow leak in your bank account is just the cost of living, when in fact, it's the cost of avoiding change. Alex closed his eyes and pictured what his life might look like if he swapped just one habit, walked down one different street, tried one new thing. Maybe it wouldn't fix everything overnight, but maybe it would open the door he didn't even know was there. And that was the thing about comfort zones, they never warn you about the opportunities you're missing. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the bank lobby was almost deafening. Alex stood in line, the metallic tang of anxiety heavy on his tongue. Clutching a credit card bill that felt heavier than paper should, it was only a slip of white ink, but the numbers printed their weight on him like a millstone. $8,460.73. He remembered when it had first started, small purchases, justified in the moment. A new phone because the old one was too slow. A weekend trip because life is short. Dinner out with friends because you can't put a price on memories. Each swipe of the card felt like a tiny liberation, a promise to deal with the cost later. But later had arrived, and it had teeth. He tried not to think about the interest, about how the minimum payment was a lie, a small number designed to make him believe he was chipping away at the debt, when in reality, it was barely touching it. Walking home from the bank, he replayed the choices that had led him here. That one time he took a payday loan because rent and the electric bill had collided in the same week. The way he told himself he'd pay it back in just 2 paychecks, only to find himself rolling it over again and again until the fees alone could have bought him a second-hand car. That had a way of making the future feel like a pawn item, something you traded for the rush of the present, only to realize it would cost you twice as much to get it back. That night, Alex sat in the dark, the only light coming from the glow of his phone screen. He opened the budgeting app he downloaded months ago but never used. He stared at the expenses column, scrolling and scrolling through every latte, every impulse buy, every little treat he thought he deserved. And for the first time, he felt the spiral not just as numbers on a page, but as a pit beneath his feet. There wasn't just money owed, it was time owed. Hours of his life he hadn't even lived yet, already sold to someone else. Every future paycheck was already spoken for, every dream already discounted before it even had a chance to breathe. Alex put the phone down, heart pounding. He knew there were no shortcuts out of this, but he also knew that if he didn't start climbing now, he might never climb at all. The smell of cinnamon sugar and fresh coffee drifted through the air as Alex walked past his favorite cafe. He hadn't planned to stop. He'd promised himself just that morning he'd avoid spending on anything that wasn't necessary. But the chalkboard sign outside was almost teasing him. New caramel swirl latte. Treat yourself today. Treat yourself. Those 2 words were his weakness. Inside, the cafe was warm, alive with chatter. The hiss of steaming milk, the clink of mugs on saucers. It felt like an escape from the cold, gray streets outside. Without thinking, Alex ordered the new latte, a slice of pumpkin bread, and because he was in the mood, a chocolate croissant for later. The total was $14.50. He tapped his card and smiled, telling himself, I work hard, I deserve this. But walking out, paper bag in hand, something about the phrase stuck in his head like an echo he couldn't shake. He thought about all the other times he'd used those same words. The time he bought a jacket he didn't need, the new earbuds when the old one still worked, the weekend getaway when his rent was due. Each time, it felt harmless, almost a reward for surviving the grind. Only now was he beginning to see the trap. The problem wasn't the coffee, the jacket, or the trip. It was the pattern. Every "I deserve this" was a vote for the present, at the expense of the future. And these small indulgences, repeated over months and years, had built a wall between him and the life he said he wanted. That evening, Alex sat on his couch, sipping what was left of the latte. The sweetness was almost too much now, glowing, artificial. He imagined each sip as a coin pulled from the jar where his dreams should be kept. He thought about his father, who used to say, the things you deserve aren't bought, they're built. At the time, Alex had brushed it off as another tired parental lecture, but now, the words felt like a warning he had ignored. He set the cup down and opened the notebook. On the first page, he wrote, deserve by building, not by buying. The next morning, he walked past the cafe without stopping. The smell was still there, warm and inviting. But this time, he kept walking, not because he didn't want it, but because he wanted something bigger and more. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Alex sat at his desk, the same desk he had been at for nearly 7 years. His fingers moved over the keyboard almost mechanically, his eyes glazing over spreadsheets filled with numbers that no longer meant anything to him. The office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer ink, a smell he could identify blindfolded. The routine was so ingrained it felt like muscle memory. arrive at 8:55, boot up the computer, answer emails, update the same reports, listen to his supervisor tell the same jokes about corporate life. At lunch, heat up the same leftovers in the same stained microwave. It wasn't that Alex hated his job. It was safe, predictable. The paycheck arrived every 2 weeks like clockwork. There was health insurance, paid vacation, and the security of knowing what tomorrow would look like. And yet, deep inside, there was a quiet, gnawing dissatisfaction he had learned to ignore. Years ago, he told himself this was temporary, that he'd stay just long enough to save some money, and then chase his dream of starting his own design business. But the comfort of stability had slowly dulled his urgency. Every year he pushed the goal a little further away, convincing himself he wasn't ready yet. That night, after another day that felt identical to the last 100 before it, Alex sat in his dim apartment, scrolling through social media. He saw old classmates launching startups, traveling the world, writing books. He remembered they used to talk about their big plans back in college. At the time, Alex had been the ambitious one. Now he was the one watching from the sidelines. The realization hit him like a cold splash of water. Comfort had cost him momentum. Stability had disguised itself as progress. He wasn't moving forward. He was standing still while the years slipped by unnoticed. He thought about the words of a podcast he listened to months ago. If you don't choose discomfort now, life will hand you discomfort later without the rewards. He nodded at the time, but hadn't acted on it. Now, it rang in his head like a warning bell. He didn't quit that night, but something shifted. For the first time in years, he opened his resume and started updating it. It was like dusting off a forgotten part of himself. He didn't know exactly where he was going yet, but he knew he couldn't keep staying here, waiting for life to change on its own. Alex stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the sleeve of a brand new suit that still smelled faintly of the department store. The crisp navy fabric, the polished shoes, the designer watch on his wrist on the outside. He looked like someone who had made it, but inside, his stomach churned. It wasn't that he needed any of this. His old suit was fine. His shoes still shined. His watch still ticked. But tomorrow was the company's annual gala, and Alex felt the unspoken pressure to look successful. He told himself it was networking, that first impressions mattered. But if he was honest, it was about something deeper, about being seen, admired, envied. The next night, the ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and polished shoes tapped against the marble floor. Alex smiled, shook hands, laughed at jokes. He caught himself scanning the room, wondering if people noticed the way his cufflinks caught the light, or how his watch peeked perfectly from his sleeve. But the more he tried to impress, the more hollow it felt. Every conversation seemed rehearsed, every compliment calculated. He could see the same hunger in others, the desperate need to be validated, to be seen as important. The truth settled in his chest like a weight. This was an expensive costume party, and everyone had paid the price. Weeks later, the credit card bill arrived. He stared at the numbers, tracing them with his finger. Suit, watch, shoes. Tickets to the gala, all for one night. One night that changed nothing about his career, his savings, or his life. One night that left him a little more in debt and a little less himself. He thought about how often he'd done this in smaller ways. Buying the latest phone because everyone else had one. Picking restaurants based on Instagram-worthy plates. Splurging on gadgets and clothes not because he needed them, but because they whispered, "Now you belong." That night, Alex sat on his couch, the suit hanging limply in the closet, and whispered to himself, "I don't want to keep paying for a version of me that only exists in other people's eyes." It wasn't about giving up nice things, it was about making sure they were bought for the right reasons. He made a quiet promise. The next time he spent big, it would be for something that truly mattered to him, not to impress a room full of strangers who'd forget his name in a week. Instant gratification, now the desire to experience pleasure or fulfillment without delay. Alex realized that instant gratification had quietly stolen his focus, money, and time. Mindless scrolling, phrase using your phone or computer without purpose, usually on social media. He was lost in mindless scrolling. His eyes glazed over as the hours disappeared. Fleeting pleasure, phrase enjoyment that lasts for a very short time. Each purchase brought a fleeting pleasure, but no real progress toward his dreams. Deliberate delay, Phrase, the intentional act of waiting before taking action. Through deliberate delay, Alex learned to pause before reacting to impulses. Reclaim ownership of your life. Phrase, taking back control over your actions and decisions. By resisting small temptations, he began to reclaim ownership of his life. Many English tip and story flow. In English, we often use the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back, to describe the final small event that pushes someone to take action. For Alex, that moment came when he realized his phone was controlling him, not the other way around. Pause before you act. A 10-second pause can be the difference between a regret and a wise choice. Identify your silent thieves. Distractions, small expenses, and wasted hours may seem harmless, but they add up. Replace, don't just remove. Replace mindless habits with purposeful ones, like reading or skill building. Small wins build momentum. Even minor victories over temptation create confidence and discipline. Freedom is conscious control. True freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's being able to resist what you don't need. Your life is not stolen in one big heist. It's taken in tiny moments, one impulsive click, one wasted hour at a time. But here's the truth. You hold the key to stop it. Every pause, every deliberate choice is a vote for the life you want, not the life distractions are trying to sell you. The silent thief of instant gratification only wins if you give it permission. Take back your time, take back your focus, and watch how small, disciplined choices can create the extraordinary life you've been dreaming of.